Hello my friends, Pest and Lawn Ginja here for another episode of What's Wrong With My Lawn? Another day, another person coming up saying, hey, I've given it all I've got and I can't figure it out. Let's bring in the expert. So here I am. Let's jump into it, guys. Here we go. I love these older, well-established neighborhoods, and when you get lawns that look like that, they're really good, and then you cross the street, it looks like this. Ugh. Feel kind of bad for them, but it looks like they tried really hard. Really just kind of want to walk you through this, and we'll go from there. So in the front yard, we've got about, if I were to guess, somewhere between 6,000 and 6,500 square feet. As you can see, we've got a little bit of problems everywhere. Now, you can really tell that the homeowners tried at this point, and they just couldn't figure it out, so they started throwing mud at the walls just to see what was going to stick, trying to diagnose it themselves. And that's why it's really important to have a guy like me that can kind of come through here, piece it all together. Now, just to run you guys through my guide, we're going to be looking at a few things, and the number one issue is going to be pattern. So let's talk about that for a second. Now, we've walked through all the way through the front yard and the backyard, and I think it's safe to say that we don't have an established pattern of issues here. It's very uneven. We've got some areas like this one behind me that aren't even growing the same height, and then we've got these blotchy spots, and you know, pattern's going to tell us a lot. We have isolated incidences. And so doing a uniform fix is not going to work. Now, I think it's safe to say everybody wants the better homes and garden look, myself included. It's not as easy as it seems, especially when you get in these older, more established homes. We're gonna have a few maintenance issues that if you put them off in the long run, it's gonna haunt you. Now, keep in mind, it's been a little over 100 degrees, a couple days this last week, and we've been in the mid to high 90s. So I know that some of this we're going to deal with the sprinkler coverage, but we know that we're dealing with an uneven distribution and pattern, so we're going to have to go through this one section at a time. So we're going to go back to the front yard, just kind of take an overall look at it. Next in line, step number 2, we're going to be looking at color. So there's a couple of random things with the color here. On this section, we've got kind of a haze. This section, I wish you could see it more in person. It looks orange. Now, this section over here is gray. And then we have a section up on the far end, up over here, where it goes yellow or brown. And yellow is typically the color of herbicide burn. Now, the one thing I want you homeowners to do to see if you've got herbicide burn is look and touch. It almost feels like hay. It's very, very crispy. It's crunchy. It almost feels like pine needles on the hand. And I think it's safe to say that this area was definitely herbicide burn. We start running through, we'll start seeing these calico patterns, and I'll get to that in a minute. I want to focus on the coloring. The coloring in this section is brown. Brown is typically going to insinuate that we have lack of water. And straight brown, you know, watering is going to be the catalyst. It's 90 degrees this week. We're going to have to force some growth through this. But then you can see around this area, we've got kind of that hazy green. It's got a little bit of brown color to it. The one thing I want to point out though is the grass type changes, and we go from having a bluegrass, which you can see there's chunks of blue in here, with a rye. So two completely different grass types. Now the interesting thing about that is they carry two different pH balances. Your ryegrass wants to sit about a 5, and your bluegrass wants to sit between a 6 and a 6.5. But then in this section, we start looking at almost a kind of a burnt aqua color. And now this color, it's got a little bit of aqua to it, a little bit of brown to it. Again, this is gonna come down to watering. The spots that bother me the most are these orange areas. Now, orange is commonly a sign of fertilizer burn. Now, our last color on the list is this white area. Now, white or gray matter typically insinuates some type of fungal activity. Now, keep in mind, once grass starts decaying, it also exhibits fungal matter. And so this could just be so dead that it sat here for so long that we are just dealing with dead grass. So this one's kind of hard to say. There are a couple of funguses that do make similar patterns like this in the state of Utah and around the Mountain West region when we get too much humidity, called Pythium blight. So there is a small chance we had some Pythium run through here because they were overwatering, trying to compensate for the areas of sprinkler coverage. Okay guys, we're gonna start digging into this gray area, and the first thing I want to point out is we've got moss. That is not super common, especially in our dry region. I think we can safely say this is being overwatered. Now, I don't want to use this as an excuse not to use the soil probe because this moss could have set in overnight due to topical watering. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a pull test here in the same area, which is, I'm fast forwarding to step 4. But the one thing I kind of want to point out is you can kind of see these little pieces right here and right here, and it looks like that's fertilizer. But I also want to, so just kind of pushing around some of this matter, and let me see if I can get a good close-up on this so I can show you right here. Start seeing these orange casings, and I've got one of them. I've got 2, 3, I've got 4. Let me see if I can just pick one up that you guys can see. These are fertilizer capsules. And my guess, I'm starting to believe, and I don't know yet, I haven't quite made up my mind, but I'm starting to believe we may have had a slight case of over-fertilization that caused all of this. So I still want to attack these random patterns, just see what we're going after. And in the backyard, we've got a little bit more of that orange haze. I think at this point it's safe to say we've got some fertilizer burn. Now this section is just a little bit different. I still want to go through this. These are our brown hazy sections. Now brown haze is typically just watering issues, and that's why we want to check it out. But I also want to see exactly what we're dealing with, so we're going to do a pull test here. As you can see, there's really nothing coming out in this section, but then boom, we've got it going on. Now, just to dispel some rumors out there, sod webworms, cranberry girdlers, they don't really like the live grass as much as they like the dead grass. So having a little bit of thatch in your lawn is not a big deal, but you definitely don't want this much and inviting these critters to just kind of stay in your house forever. But as you can see, our pull test is testing positive for insect activities, and that's pretty common with a lawn this distressed. I would say it's probably been under stress for probably almost 2 months would be my best guess here, without knowing a history on this lawn. Our overall pattern is telling us that we've got uneven distribution, we've got isolated instances. Now at this point, we've got a couple of issues going on. We know that we've got insect activity, and we also know that we've got fertilizer burning. We also know that we end up having sprinkler coverage issues due to lack of water, but we don't want to just guess. And we want to do the doing and not the guessing work. So we're going to grab the soil probe and the Thatch Rake, and we're going to really get in here and just make sure that everything lines up. Checking water saturation with the soil probe is really important. You got this area right here. We go through here, and the plug, it's dry. Now, the funny thing is though, is if you look at it, I mean, it's bone dry. Then we move over couple of feet, pull another one. You can see the water is saturating deeper, but it's not particularly where we want it. It's still dry. There's a couple of reasons why I love the soil probe. The soil probe never lies. It tells me if there's water or not. We get in here, and as you can see, this area, it's bone dry. Like there's just no water. It just crumbles out and there's nothing in it. Chances are they tried to treat this for weeds. They've got spurge right next to it. As you can see here, it's not going away, and my guess is they sprayed it. Now, as we come just due east, it's wet. Plenty of water in the soil. Grass goes straight green. Now, this area over here ended up being really wet, but you can see it's still got that brown haze on it, which tells me they were working on the sprinkler covers and most likely knew they had a coverage problem. So they upped the minutes on the timer. But as we get closer and closer to the neighboring property, this whole area is dry. And you can kind of see where the biggest problems are with the sprinklers are right here. And I love it when we have these round patterns. Round patterns insinuates that the sprinkler head is pushing the water. Most sprinklers push it in a 90 or 180, but they're gonna have real round edges to it. So that makes it really easy to figure these areas out. But we still wanna run a cup test, which I'm not going to do. I'm gonna leave that up to the potential client here to do, so I don't have to deal with that. But ultimately, we're definitely, causation is going to be lack of sprinklers or lack of water. So our secondary issues are going to be insects, and then we've got some tertiary issues going on with fungal matter that need to be dealt with. So doing a thatch test is really important for a couple different reasons. Number one, when we have too much thatch, we get some really weird things going on. The water gets stuck in the evaporation, and then the grass is forced to transpire faster. But that thatch also heats up. So it leaves you prone for fungal activity and fungal spores. The other issue is too much thatch will lead to insect activity. So you don't want to have too much of that either. The other issue that we have is the water eventually can't get down to where it needs to go. So you end up having to water more. As a result, the roots will curl back and start growing upward. And we also don't want that either. But let's take a look at these thatch results to see what we're looking at. We'll start up top in this area, and we know that it's lack of water coupled with too much fertilizer, and it could cause some burning. Now, I'm not as concerned with this spot. There's not a ton of thatch that needs to be removed. And I remove about a 2 foot by 2 foot section is how I do it. It's not excessive, which is nice in that section. This section was a little bit more excessive. You can start to see that the ryegrass, which naturally does this in Utah, kind of lives and dies a couple times a year. So this section could definitely use a power rake. Moving on to this heavily burned area. You can see I'm not pulling a lot of thatch, but the one thing that I want to call to action here is you definitely want to rake over this. We need more oxygen in the area. And as you can see, after I remove the matter, you can physically see into the roots. Now, if we dig in here a little bit further, you'll start to see new growth, which is right here. I don't know if you guys can see that in TV land, but we're starting to get some of these rhizomes popping through, just like this one right here. And it's really important that you let this grass breathe. So a light raking. We definitely don't want to just scrape it out as hard as we can. That wouldn't make any sense. You'll just ruin some of that rhizomatous activity. Now this area, all rye, not a ton of thatch. Could it use a little cleanup? Maybe a slight cleanup, but nothing abrasive. Now, one thing I found really interesting, I don't run into this quite often, but this whole area is getting overrun with Bermuda grass. And in Utah, this doesn't match any of the perennial rye, fescue, or blue that we have. And how you identify bluegrass is pretty simple. It grows off of a stolon instead of a rhizome. This creeping stalk grows above the ground, and we get grass shooting upward. So I'm going to make them aware of this issue. You guys in TV land there have made me aware of a couple different types of sprays for Bermuda grass that I'm going to recommend that they do that first before hitting it with glyphosate. Over here is our healthiest patch of blue that we have in the lawn, and oddly enough, we have one patch of rye right in the middle. And as you can see, the interesting part about this thatch test is we started getting a lot of crown on top, which tells me that they've more than likely been overwatering and leaving it on top. Now you can see leaving the water at the top layers instead of deep. You can see I started digging through and I'm getting roots coming up with live grass and that crown. Now, once I dig into the grass, as you can see, you guys can do this at home. One easy way that you can check for thatch is just by parting it with your hands, like as if you would part your hair. Now, one thing that I like to see is I like to start seeing the dirt in here, which you can clearly see at this point. So there's thatch sitting on top, but a pretty healthy layer. The roots are a little shallow, but not enough to balk at. So I kind of feel like this episode of What's Wrong with My Lawn is going to hit home with a lot of you guys. This lawn has several problems. We're not even close to getting to a maintenance fertilizer plan, and that's kind of what we need to build up to. Don't get too frustrated with this kind of a problem. Just like I did in this video, you just have to take it section by section to identify the overall issues. Now, because we have overall lack of water, overall burning, the one thing that I was going to point out that maybe I forgot to earlier was those fertilizer pellets have already dissipated. They're already gone. So I don't really need to worry about focusing on neutralizing them. And oddly enough, I'm going to show you what I'm going to use. We're going to end up using more ammoniacal nitrates to stimulate and cause growth. Now, they've got to do a couple of things before we come out here and we start hitting it with chemical. So the biggest recommendation I'm going to make is to hire a sprinkler specialist to go through the lawn and to fix the sprinkler coverage. This is pretty bad. We know that we've got sections that aren't hitting. Some of these sections are too wet and some sections just have almost enough. So the one question I get asked a lot is, how can I tell if the guy who ran the sprinklers and made the adjustments did a good enough job? So I always refer people to a water cup test. Go down to Dollar Tree, go down to your local dollar store. You can get little pieces of Tupperware that are about 3 inches in diameter, 3 inches in tall. What you're gonna do is you're gonna label those on the bottom of the cups, A through K. You're gonna set those between each one of the sprinklers. So if you have one here and here, one right in the middle. If you have a sprinkler here and one over here, right in the middle of that one too. So you're gonna grid that out. Go to Google Maps, grid it out on a piece of paper. Then you're gonna run a 20-minute cycle and you're gonna record and measure with a measuring tape how much water depth is in each one of the Tupperware cups. Now, this is gonna expose some of the outliers. Some of your cups are gonna have 1/8 of an inch, some of them are gonna have 1/4, some of them are gonna have 1/2. If you don't have something fairly consistent, you know that station needs to be adjusted. Tip of the day, guys, pretty simple to do. Now here's the part you've all been waiting for. How do we fix this, Ginja? Well, let's take a look. Here is our plan of action. Number one, they've got to lightly rake through all the dead areas. Get those microbials stirring. We also want to make sure that the oxygen is flowing and not getting choked out by matted grass. Number two, we want to check and make sure with a soil probe or a screwdriver that we've got even saturation 4 to 6 inches into the soil before we start this process. If we don't have enough in the soil, we're going to burn. Now, as for chemicals, number one, we're going to be using the Essentials Plus. Now, just like I've shown you guys before, this is chock full of L-amino acids, and I know sometimes I call them alaminos. I'm retarded, I apologize. Now, the vitamin B2 and B6, this is really important. It's not really the phosphorus that causes the growth as much as it is the root growth, as much as the vitamin B2 and the B6. So that's why it's really important to have. Now, the kelp to humic acid ratios is going to help slough off the salt sediments off of the roots and help your beneficial bacterias, such as your mycorrhizae, hit. Now we're gonna give it a boost of mycorrhizae, and I know this is rated for trees, guys, and shrubs, but it's great for grass. Now on the back end, in the same backpack, I like to use Demand CS. It's got lambda cyhalothrin that's microencapsulated for a quick fix for the bugs. Now, if you're looking for something cheaper than Demand CS, you can pick up Cyonara 9.1, if memory serves me right, off of Amazon, and it's also a great product for hitting sod webworms and cutworms that we're dealing with in this lawn. It's really important to remember to replenish the nutrients that have been lost by the lack of microbial action. So the mycorrhiza, pushing that in is really going to help, but we're still going to need some micronutrients, and that's why I like the Max Pack. You don't necessarily need to buy Max Pack per se. You can find a product that's got just much sulfur, boron, copper, cobalt, manganese, molybdenum, and zinc in another product. These are your primary micronutrients that you want to focus on. Now on the back end, we need to cause some quick growth because we want to make sure that we push those rhizomes and thicken up the grass as naturally as we possibly can, but we also want to give it a little sugar to get out of its funk and so we can get it to start growing again. I like to use Nitroking. It's a 2124. Again, you do not have to use this product. You just need to find something like Nitroking, which is 16 to 17% ammonium nitrate with a 4% nitrate nitrogen on the back end. So that's the numbers I'm really looking at, is getting that 16% ammonium nitrate down to cause the quick growth. All right, guys, this is a tough one. I'm glad we got through it together. Now that I've given you all my trade secrets, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button on your way out. If you guys have any questions or concerns, hit me up in the comments. I've got a list of the products that I use in the description. Until next time, guys, what's wrong with my lawn? See ya.